What if the world gets significantly colder over the next few decades? An ice age, because the world's most important ocean current simply stops working, and what if the only idea that could still prevent that is a planned mega project from the Soviet Union?
Hold on tight, guys. Today's gonna be wild.
Are you more of a summer or winter person? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Winter people might have the advantage because if the Gulf Stream collapses, temperatures will drop dramatically. So unlike the channel's subscriber numbers, please keep following me and recommend the channel to your best friends, your grandma, and your trusted meteorologist.
And if you've already subscribed, help the video out with a thumbs up. Let's try to hit 5,000 likes. Thanks a lot, guys. And now imagine you wake up one morning and the news reports that London, Paris, and Berlin are permanently about 10 degrees colder than they are today. Not just a short-term weather quirk, but a new normal for centuries to come. Don't panic, this isn't a realistic scenario for tomorrow morning.
But it describes very well what could happen if a certain oceanic system that has kept our climate in balance for millennia were to collapse. Like the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC for short, perhaps better known as the Gulf Stream, even if that isn't entirely accurate. Strictly speaking, the Gulf Stream is just one part of this gigantic conveyor belt of ocean currents that transports warm surface water from the tropics far to the north. There it cools down, becomes heavier, sinks to the depths, and flows back southward. The system functions like a giant air conditioner. Without the AMOC, winters would be harsher, summers cooler, and agriculture more problematic in many regions.
The problem, this system is weakening. For decades, researchers have observed how the AMOC is losing strength.
The reason is the meltwater from Greenland and the Arctic, which is increasingly flowing into the North Atlantic. This fresh water is lighter than salt water, it does not sink as easily, and thus a crucial part of the driving mechanism breaks down. If the AMOC were to eventually collapse completely, it would be practically irreversible, a state from which there is no turning back on human timescales.
And then we would have temperatures in Europe that would be more pleasant for mammoths than for humans.
You have beautiful eyes.
Get off my face.
Well, you and me, we make a great team.
Researchers are debating just how close we actually are to this AMOC tipping point. Some studies warn that a collapse could occur within this century, while others consider that an exaggeration. However, there is agreement that the AMOC has become more fragile and that a collapse would have consequences reaching far beyond Europe. Extreme weather events, altered monsoon patterns, sea level rise on the east coast of North America. The Earth is simply an interconnected system. But now we come to the part where this story gets really strange. Because one of the most promising ideas for how we might still save the AMOC comes from a very unexpected place.
And that brings us to the Bering Strait, a narrow strait between Alaska and Russia that connects the Pacific Ocean with the Arctic Ocean, just 80 kilometers wide, with an average depth of 50 meters. Geographically speaking, the end of the world. One of my favorite facts, by the way. Here, between the Greater and Lesser Diomede Islands and the Bering Strait, Russia and the US are only 3.8 kilometers apart, and through this strait, water constantly flows northward from the Pacific into the Arctic. This water is relatively low in salt, and that is precisely the problem. It eventually ends up in the North Atlantic, where it dilutes the salt water and thereby weakens the downwelling process that drives the AMOC. The Bering Strait flow is, in a sense, a small but constant leak in the engine of our climate machine. So what if we plugged this leak and built the largest dam this planet has ever seen? This idea exists, but it's not all that new.
Back in the 1950s and 60s, Soviet engineers planned a massive dam across the Bering Strait. Back then, though, it was for entirely different reasons. The goal was to warm up the Arctic to make the North more suitable for agriculture. What could possibly go wrong? A classic relic from the era of grand utopias. And today, it's more the fear of the opposite that's bringing the same idea back to the surface.
And that's exactly why researchers at Utrecht University have now dusted off the old Soviet idea and run it through a climate model. Their idea, a massive dam across the Bering Strait. 3 sections would connect Russia to Alaska via the Diomede Islands, totaling just under 80 kilometers. The researchers have reached a surprising conclusion. In their simulations, a dam built in time could increase the so-called safe carbon budget, That is, the amount of CO2 we are still allowed to emit without the AMOC collapsing by up to 500 billion tons of carbon. As is so often the case, there is a catch, and it is a crucial one. There is a catch, or rather several, because a dam built too late could actually make the situation worse. If the AMOC has already weakened too much, the effect of the Bering Strait reverses. The open water then serves a stabilizing function. If you close it off anyway, you accelerate the collapse instead of stopping it. Researchers Jelle Sohns and Henk Dijkstra state this very clearly in their study. An intervention that comes too late will instead accelerate the collapse.
Absolutely crazy. A dam meant to save us could, under the wrong conditions, become the trigger for catastrophe. So the time window is crucial. According to model calculations, after the start of serious CO2 levels, you'd have about 150 to 250 years to build the dam, assuming the AMOC is still strong enough at that point. Sounds like a lot, but considering the political, ecological, and technical hurdles of such a project, it's not much. I mean, it already took 14 years for the Berlin airport. And speaking of technical hurdles, let's take a look at how realistic such a dam would even be.
The Bering Strait is relatively shallow, usually only about 30 to 50 meters deep. For the specific dam route proposed, the researchers estimate an average water depth of around 50 meters, with a maximum of 59. By comparison, the world's largest dam, the Seaman-Gyeom seawall in South Korea, is 33 kilometers long and up to 54 meters deep. While the Bering Dam would be significantly longer at around 80 kilometers, the water depths are in the same range. The researchers estimate that about 1.3 cubic kilometers of construction material would be required. That is 3.5 times the amount used for the expansion of the port of Rotterdam, so high figures, but nothing completely outlandish, technically feasible, according to the study's assessment, which states the technical feasibility of the Bering Strait Dam is supported by the fact that the construction challenges are comparable to those of already completed megaprojects. While I find the idea fascinating, an 80-kilometer-long dam between Russia and the US, perhaps the most ambitious project anyone has ever conceived from a geopolitical perspective. But of course, there are also arguments against it because it wouldn't actually solve the underlying problem. We would merely be treating a symptom while risking such massive interference in other ecosystems that entirely new problems would arise. Fish stocks, ocean temperatures, Arctic habitats, all of these would be altered by blocking the Bering Strait, and not necessarily for the better. As the study's authors themselves write, we assume that the dam will have significant impacts on the regional ecosystem and therefore wish to emphasize, particularly in this context, that CO2 reduction measures are the preferred option for preventing a collapse of the AMOC. However, should this not be implemented, the study has shown that a timely artificial closure of the Bering Strait can prevent a collapse of the AMOC. Feel free to let me know what you think. Does this idea make sense and should it be pursued, or is it pure megalomania?
I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, and I'll definitely keep you updated. Feel free to subscribe to the channel right now so you'll always get a notification, and remember to give a thumbs up so we can hit 5,000 likes. And now, let's move from the Bering Strait over to the South Pacific.
Because while we're pondering the future of the Gulf Stream, something is brewing off the coast of South America that will soon throw global weather into a tailspin. We're talking about a Super El Nino that's currently on its way, and what that will mean for global weather is anything but reassuring. The video on this topic is waiting for you in the top right corner. Be sure to check it out. It's very, very exciting. And if you click in the bottom left, you can visit the Space Shop to get the shirts featured in the videos. Every order really supports my work. Otherwise, I'd say see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.